Hello and welcome to SimCast, the higher education simulation podcast. My name's Tony Jeremy and I'm joined by my regular co-host and reprobate, Dr. Lawrence Hill.
Hello everyone, thank you very much for giving me my full title, Tony. It's about time you showed me a little bit more respect. Welcome to SimCast everyone, and we hope you enjoy this episode. Today we're going to be focusing on verbs, which I feel like I should be doing the kind of glasses emoji.
So today we're going to be talking about learning outcomes.
We're talking about learning
verbs.
outcomes.
So it's one of our favourite topics.
Hobby horse.
A hobby horse of ours.
Yeah.
And we thought it was about time that we looked at it in a bit more detail. We've alluded to learning outcomes quite a bit, but we thought they're important enough. They need their own episode.
Yeah, they do. And we've also had a bit of a tinker with Bloom's taxonomy. And
that's not something you hear every day.
Well, hopefully Bloom's won't mind. But actually, we feel that what we've produced and what we will present to you in this episode is a very realistic and usable taxonomy of action verbs for simulation.
And of course, if you agree with us, if you disagree with us, whatever it is, stick a comment below. We'd always be intrigued to hear what your thoughts are.
Yep, absolutely. So, Bloom's taxonomy then. Well, let's start with Bloom's taxonomy. So it's probably worth just setting out some basics about Bloom's taxonomy, and that is that Bloom's, an educational theorist, separated out taxonomies of learning effectively into 6 domains. Basically, remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, and create.
And straight away, I can see a potential problem here in terms of simulation.
Yeah, exactly. But the reason that Bloom's did that was because it was about saying that these are sort of stepping stones to higher levels of understanding.
There's definitely a progression there, isn't there?
Yeah. In order to be able to analyze something, you have to be able to describe it. In order to be able to create something, you have to be able to have analyzed it into its constituent parts and put it back together. So there is real value in Bloom's, and it underpins, I would say, most, if not all, learning outcomes in the higher education sector.
Yeah, so the problem is people can they either don't apply it or they take it to the nth degree and make it too complicated. So when it works best is it hits that sweet spot of it informs a learning outcome that is clear to understand and, more importantly, can be applied to whatever educational technique you're using with your learners.
Yeah. We should also say as well, for like full clarity, there are lots of other potential taxonomies of learning or of action verbs for structuring learning. There's Solo, there's Finks, there's Webbs, there's Marzano and Kendall. And what we're setting out to do here is not to create a new taxonomy. What we wanted to do was to reduce the complexity to make something that was so much more approachable for learners, for facilitators of simulation. Because one of the things we've learned over the last 18 months to 2 years of running our simulation instructor course is
it's really difficult to write a learning outcome.
Writing learning outcomes is actually quite challenging. To make them succinct and actionable and measurable is actually quite challenging. And we've talked about this topic a fair bit, and we thought it was probably about time we contributed something useful.
Yeah. It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because our philosophy is the learning outcomes should drive everything, both intended and potentially unintended. But when you get people to try and sit down and write some learning outcomes, it's a lot more challenging than what you first think.
Yeah.
And I guess the risk
is... And they should be central. And they should be central.
Well, yeah. And if they're not there at all, which we appreciate that can happen sometimes with simulation, you get whisked away with the allure of delivering simulation. You don't even perhaps think about your learning outcomes. What's the point?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the point, I suppose, is if you're setting out with simulation-based education with an intentional pedagogical goal, then it ought to be driven by intended learning outcomes. Transformational approaches to simulation, some in situ simulation as sort of diagnostic tool may not have intended learning outcomes in quite the same way, but it's likely to have overarching aims about understanding how a system works and what have you. But what we're focusing on this episode is when you're writing a set of objectives or outcomes for an intended learning outcome for some specific goal.
Yeah. So I guess what we're looking at here is there's a couple of problems, isn't there? There's learning outcomes in general and people's understanding of them, and then there's application to simulation as well.
Yeah.
Which then adds an extra layer of complexity that needs to be considered.
There are some challenges with the learning outcomes that can be written. Sometimes they can feel kind of overly intellectualized, and that's not very helpful if you're trying to think about the end user as well.
Yeah, exactly. Does it make sense?
Exactly. And does it give me a clear sense of what I'm trying to achieve in this particular simulation? If I'm going in and the person's briefing me and they're giving me a nice, clear, succinct, actionable thing to do, that's nice. If they're saying, the example we've got here, evaluate the epistemological framework of, it's not appropriate for simulation because that's not what we're asking learners to do in simulation more often than not. How learners come to knowledge, their epistemology might become apparent in a debrief.
Yeah.
But we don't need to be giving them that as the intended learning outcome necessarily.
I think the other issue is the verbs need... They need to be actionable, but also potentially, and I'm going to choose my words carefully, measurable, but maybe not in terms of assessment.
Yeah, sure.
Because even the word outcome and objective is slightly different, isn't it?
Yes, indeed. Yeah, so generally speaking, an outcome will be an overarching module or program kind of outcome, aim, whereas an objective might be something that was smaller and more bite-sized that enables the meeting of a broader learning outcome.
So what should we be using? Are we getting it wrong straight away from the bat? We're diving into another language lesson, aren't we?
Yeah, but I think most of the time in simulation we're writing sort of session objectives. We call them learning outcomes. I think the terms get used interchangeably. There's probably educational theoretical theorists absolutely furious at this moment. It's sort of flecks of spit going everywhere as they're driving to work, but
elbow pads are falling off with rage.
But broadly speaking, what we're talking about is a statement which is driving learning.
Yeah.
So
being able to measure it, as in you achieve that, is really important.
Yeah.
We're gonna, when we come down to the part when we talk about our verbs, we're also going to be talking about some things to potentially avoid.
Yeah, absolutely.
Words to avoid, because that being able to measure it becomes more challenging with certain verbs.
Indeed. And but the thing is, as we'll talk about some of the challenges, but we sort of started by saying that Bloom's taxonomy is essentially part of the educational foundation of most higher education programs, which is where we are predominantly operating, and so. One of the sort of critiques of Bloom's is that it focuses overly on cognitive domains of practice, and obviously, a simulation
is a lot in the physical domain.
There's going to be some psychomotor stuff, and there's going to be some affective, emotional stuff in there as well. But they do work, and being the pragmatist that we are, I think what we want is people to be able to use appropriate verbs to construct useful learning outcomes and objectives in a way that fits into a broader curriculum of education, whether that's clinical or academic pre-registration.
Yeah. The other thing to bear in mind is these outcomes or objectives, whatever you want to call them, they're important in terms of how you structure your overall simulation activity. Okay, when you do the briefing, they should be central to the briefing.
Yep.
One of the first things you do when you open up a session is you go over what the learning outcomes or objectives are. So again, that previews for the learners so they get a sense of what they need to do to achieve whatever is unfolding in that simulation.
Yeah.
You return back to those learning outcomes and objectives in your debrief to help you structure that and to help that analysis section of the debrief have some direction of travel in a meaningful way.
Absolutely.
So that and you might even return to them once more as you close and finish the session. Mm-hmm. So they're pivotal, aren't they?
They are. They're pivotal.
And to those of us who are, fairly comfortable and educated in terms of delivering simulation-based education, when they're missing, it's very apparent.
Yeah, absolutely. It's incredibly difficult to as an educator to commit to a session if you don't know what that session's trying to achieve. So getting them right is really important.
How many times have you been helping or facilitating a session and you've gone, what are the intended learning outcomes for this?
Yeah, and
this
we touched on this on our Axe to Grind episode a little while ago, and that's kind of partly what's triggered us to talk about this today. Is that actually there's no point us groaning about the fact that we've been in that situation where it's like,
what are we going to do about it?
Is it okay if I write some learning outcomes for my room or for my sim? And the challenge with basing a sort of a taxonomy for action verbs around Bloom's is that, broadly speaking, those first two sections of Bloom's, remember and understand, kind of broadly most of the time equate to higher education level 4, which is more often than not the first year one of a direct entry 3-year degree program. Apply and analyze level 5, year 2. That's normally the kind of expectation of learning. And generally speaking, final year of an undergraduate program, level 6, will be about evaluation and synthesis. The reason that Bloom's starts to fall down, or that simulation breaks Bloom's taxonomy, is that by the very nature of asking somebody to do something, they are applying or demonstrating, which already sits in Bloom's kind of in the level 5 action verbs.
Yeah, I mean, arguably, if you are using a algorithm in a simulation, you can recall it. Mm-hmm. So you might kind of be further down that taxonomy, but you're absolutely right. If you're applying and doing, you're straight away into
sort of a level 5 action verb. And so, the first thing to say really on this kind of revised adapted taxonomy is that it is imperfect. Because actually, if you're going to be an absolute purist and say, right, well, no, it's the first year of a degree, so we need level 4 learning outcomes, you might have level 4 learning outcomes at the level of the modules, but your session objectives might require your learners to demonstrate or even to judge.
But I also think that's reflective of simulation, right? So when we do simulation in year 1, in terms of how you would structure it in terms of curriculum design, and modality of simulation, which we've talked about again before, it needs to come right towards the end. So it is that sort of advanced level 4 transitioning into level 5. Because it's a complex way of having a very rewarding method of educational delivery.
I would agree. Yeah. So right off the bat, we're saying that this isn't a perfect thing.
Well, it's fraught with error, isn't it? Because and one of the reasons again we're doing this is on our simulation instructor course, we run an exercise where we get educators to write 2 very basic learning outcomes for a very basic
mandatory training
session. And we started off by just putting up, what was it, Bloom's adapted taxonomy of action verbs, a massive list of different things. And then we were like, well, I don't think we're happy with that. And so there is a paper by Newton et al., and we'll put a link up to it, which is a pragmatic master list of action verbs.
Yeah.
Which is better,
much better, and they went
still
through
not perfect,
and because of perhaps partly because of the methodology they applied, they did a literature review and then looked at the number of studies that
It's just worth bearing
included.
in mind that the methodology is far more robust than what we did, which was
No,
on
that's
the
true.
back of a fag packet halfway through a session.
So yes, fair point.
Actually, you did a little bit more than that.
Good point, well made. But no, we basically the method they applied, they did a literature review, and they looked at the frequency these words were used, and then the categories, the levels of blooms that they were used in, and then they essentially went through a process of determining which ones they thought should be there.
And what I really
based on
liked about that
frequency.
paper, and what we've also adapted to that, is words to avoid.
Yeah, absolutely. To be honest, that paper had me at the word pragmatic, but yeah, the words to avoid is really useful, and we'll dig into that in a minute. So where are we going next?
Should we put them up?
Yeah, that's
Let's
a
put
good
them
idea.
up on the screen
Yeah, absolutely.
and have a look at them. So the column on the left is verbs to avoid, and I think that's really important that is quite prominent.
Yeah. And for those that are listening only, the verbs to avoid are words like appreciate, know, understand, and explain.
So why are those words to avoid? Perhaps in general, but certainly when we're looking at simulation-based education. My bugbear of mine, and one that comes up all the time, I guess when people don't think carefully about it, is understand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's a tricky one, because actually understanding is quite a sophisticated concept. And I think that's the issue, because...
And again, it goes back to my point of how do you measure that? How do you measure understanding?
Yeah, it's very hard to, because it's kind of an internal thing.
Yeah. And if you are to measure understanding, what you'll probably find is there will be another verb which is more suitable.
That's right, yeah. And it's similar to the word appreciate. The word appreciate has limitations, because, I appreciate it. To what? Yeah.
To what extent?
To what
in
extent?
What ways do you appreciate?
Yeah. So for me, it lacks specificity in terms of what it's asking a learner to do. I want you to appreciate that. Yeah, I appreciate it. It doesn't. It's not very actionable, and for that, it's a little bit tricky. But what we've also done is, rather than for the words that we do advocate using for writing simulation learning outcomes, is rather than describe them as being at level 4, 5, and 6, essentially we are talking about these words as being knowing words, doing or analysing or applying words, and evaluating or judging or synthesising words. And when we think about it like that, if we think about, you've got to know stuff and you've got to do stuff and you've got to judge stuff as a practitioner, then, or evaluate things, that's perhaps a more useful way of framing these words, and then using that as then, okay, what do I want my learners to know? What do I want them to do? And what do I want them to sort of evaluate or judge?
So if the first column is words to avoid, the second column, which is, I guess, foundational, that's probably the way that we can think about it.
Yeah.
Is knowing.
Yeah. Knowing stuff.
So the verbs that we've come up with is define. And again, if we think about it in terms of simulation-based education, there might not be many applications, but there are still potentially some. Mm-hmm. So define, describe, recall. Yep. I think that's going to be particularly useful in simulation. You might have to recall
an algorithm
or
a set of guidelines.
Yeah, or a
piece of legislation,
an assessment strategy, something like that.
The Mental Capacity Act.
Yeah, and then discuss. Which again, if we're thinking about all of the simulation-based education the modalities, certainly in the debrief, the discussion point is going to be pivotal.
Yeah.
Pivotal.
Yeah.
I made a new word there that I was going to pop into the action verbs.
And it's important to say as well that these are words. We didn't make these words up. What we did is we took the
pragmatic list and just trimmed it down a bit.
We basically trimmed it down because
with zero methodology.
I think with the practical, the phronesis,
just trying to get to you.
the phronesis, the practical wisdom of having written copious simulation learning outcomes and find the words that you end up going to routinely because they work.
Can I ask you a question?
No.
Okay, fine.
No, go on. Yeah.
I'm going to anyway.
Yeah.
I like to have 3 learning outcomes. 3s are nice. People remember 3s.
Yeah.
It's
good rhetoric.
When I'm doing 3's the magic number, right? When I'm doing simulation, I also like to have maybe a technical and a non-technical learning outcome. What I try and do, though, and I don't know why, I try and not use the same verb twice. Is that something that you do?
I think I probably do the same as well. Yeah.
Is it just because it's just been ingrained into you in sort of academic writing that you don't overuse the same words and nouns?
I think that I like to think.
I don't think there's anything wrong with.
I like to think that I'm sensitive. I like to think that I'm
outcomes.
sensitive to the fact that those words are asking someone to do something slightly different.
Okay, fine, yeah.
And for that reason, I'll try and be judicious in the word that I use, because I'm thinking, what do I really want the learner to do with X or Y? But I definitely try and avoid using the same word twice. Yeah, if I can.
Yeah, but we've got 12 examples here, so that should be more than enough to set a learning outcome for any simulation-based education.
So those are the knowing verbs that we
foundational,
the foundational knowing verbs that we think are useful for that level of
the next column is going to be the interesting one, isn't it? Because it's going to be the one that you can most readily apply to simulation-based education activity, whether it's skills,
the thing
drills, or simulation.
Here's a challenge: write a simulation-based learning outcome without using a doing or applying verb. And you can't do it, because if you can do it, it doesn't actually have to be a simulation session. So we've got kind of doing or applying in this second column. And underneath that, we've got demonstrate, apply, analyze, and differentiate. And the reason that we've gone for those, demonstrate is, if you were to just have one,
it's my go-to, right?
Yeah.
Demonstrate how to do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
Because it's the physical activity of sim.
Yeah. But so demonstrate is a golden word in simulation, because that's what we want. We want a demonstration. It's an activity. It shouldn't
demonstrate
be overly
effective
cognitive.
chest compressions. Demonstrate effective communication.
Yeah.
Demonstrate debriefing with good judgment. Mm-hmm. You can apply it into so many different ways.
And then the other second word, apply, is similar, but it for me, it has the opportunity to draw more of the knowing into the doing. So it's more theoretical apply than demonstrate.
Yeah, because again, if you think about it in sort of practical applications, again, apply the advanced life support algorithm. Mm-hmm. So it's a clear way to be measured. So if we just flip that to the words to avoid, you could write the same learning outcome, couldn't you? Apply the advanced life support algorithm. Understand the advanced life support algorithm. Very, very difficult to measure the second.
Yeah.
Much, much easier to measure the first.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. The other two, analyze and differentiate, are, I think, probably action verbs that would be useful for driving discussion in a debrief. But equally, you could use those words for asking somebody within a simulation to analyze their course of action, or a presentation, and to determine a path.
Here's another question for you. We've alluded to the fact that a couple of these outcomes or objectives or verbs would be nice in the debrief. How often do you actively write learning objectives or outcomes for debrief discussion rather than simulation activity?
I would say that I probably don't.
It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. Again, open to the floor. You guys, if you have a view, like who out there who's writing simulation scenarios writes intentional learning objectives or outcomes that are meant for the debrief? Because we'd love to hear from you.
We've said, if it doesn't have a debrief, is it really sim?
Yeah. Yeah, so you could, I suppose, and as well, if you were designing a simulation with a large group in mind, potentially you might actually write intentionally debrief orientated learning outcomes and objectives. And analyze and differentiate might be quite useful in that context, but they might also be useful in the action phase as well.
Okay, last column.
Evaluate.
Okay.
Classically, this is about evaluation and synthesis. So this is about
not just good and bad.
Not just good and bad, but absolutely about integration of component parts. And you could argue that simulation is all about the synthesis of cognitive, affective, and psychomotor domains of practice, which is another reason that simulation breaks blooms. But classically, we're not asking learners in higher education to do things like synthesis and judgment until they are more learned, more mature as learners, because they need to know stuff and do stuff and analyze things before they can put them together in unique, creative ways.
So what have we got in this column then? We've got evaluate, as the title name suggests. We've got judge, justify, and formulate.
Mm-hmm. So for me, these words relate really nicely to simulation, particularly sort of justify and formulate around, in a simulation, if you wanted to have some kind of, if the main protagonist or learner in the simulation is trying to determine a course of action, which is quite often the way, what's your plan for this patient or for this service user? That is an exercise in judgment, in justification, and in formulating a plan and based on the synthesis of what's come before it. Evaluate as well, I think, is a really useful, powerful verb to use in those simulations, because it requires that appraisal of whether it was an effective or an ineffective course of action.
Yeah, it's stimulating reflection, isn't it?
I think the issue with two of those words is that they are at risk of feeling judgmental.
One of them is the name, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's literally that.
Yeah. So, but also evaluation. We talk a lot about evaluation apprehension. So, when crafting learning outcomes using the words judge or evaluate, I would be very careful to make sure that it was a judgment or evaluation of the subject of the simulation, not the object.
Individuals, yeah.
Not the participant.
Yeah.
But of the scenario.
Let's just pick apart everything that you've just done.
Exactly. And that's not going to be a psychologically safe environment which is conducive to learning. That's going to feel like a character assassination if done wrong. So that's our take, I suppose.
Yeah. So the question is, what happens when there are bad learning outcomes, or worse still, no learning outcomes? So I'm an educator. I'm listening to this. I've had that light bulb moment, that divine moment of inspiration where I thought, actually, I need to clean up my outcome game. Read into that what you will. How do I get started then? Because what we've experienced is writing outcomes is challenging.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what do you do if that's you? I think it's a case of just saying, right, well, what do I want to achieve?
Yeah.
What is my aim? What is the purpose?
Because I think practically sometimes you're like, okay, I need to do a topic. Mm-hmm. There's a topic in a curriculum, or there's a desire or a need for something to happen. That's what's normally been driven this learning session, whether it's simulation-based education or any other format, actually. And given the bare bones, I'm like, well, how do I formulate a learning outcome or objective from that? It might be that you go back to some curriculum documentation. It might help you.
Yep.
But often it's not there.
No, so maybe you start with the topic. So let's say like the classic simulation scenario, anaphylaxis.
Yeah.
Right, I know I've got to do an anaphylaxis sim. Okay. I would say, okay, I know the subject is anaphylaxis. I know that I've got everything else I need. I've got a team, I've got equipment, I've got a space to do stuff in. I need some information. What I would say is, right, I know the topic's anaphylaxis. Find a verb or a collection of verbs to start these statements, these outcome statements with.
Yeah.
So what do you need them to know? Pick one from the knowing column.
What do they need to do?
Exactly. And is it appropriate
at this point
for
a point of a period of evaluation?
And if it's an anaphylaxis sim, there's a good chance that actually there needs to be some kind of formulation of a plan, because they're going to need oxygen and they're going to need adrenaline and they're going to need IV cannulation and fluids.
Complex, isn't it? So I guess the more complex it is, the more you're going to lean into that evaluation or judgment on it as well.
Yeah.
Did
And you
it
can
go
combine
well? Did
verbs.
it not go well?
And you can combine those verbs if you want to. Within having said don't make them, too complex, there's nothing wrong with saying, combining a couple of verbs that sit nicely together to make a nice chunky outcome that you're trying to achieve. I don't have an objection with that. Again, we might have educational theorists furious at the idea of combining verbs in a learning outcome, but I think it works. And this is all about being pragmatic. So I would say use one or two.
Pragmatic, as the name suggests.
Yeah.
So I'm also not averse to having a little bit of AI help me write some learning outcomes sometimes if I'm stuck. Even just for a starter for 10, maybe not the finished polished product, but for some inspiration.
Yeah, or the other way around. Say you've got, you might have some learning outcomes that you've written, and you're like, how do I make these more simple? Please simplify.
Please,
Dear chat,
decluster.
Please simplify these learning outcomes.
Mr. GP Turing.
Yeah, Mr. GP Turing. Yeah, exactly. So I think that's the place to go if you're thinking, I wonder what my outcomes look like.
I have done that actually, not for simulation based education, but for some assessment outcomes actually, which are quite complicated. I've asked for a little bit of a simplification because when you're looking at something and you can't see the wood through the trees for it sometimes, and you're like, what? I'm trying to find the problem with this, and it's a stumbling block for me as well. Just running it through and trying to make sense of it is useful. That personal assistant in your pocket is a really useful thing to have.
The other real advantage of getting these learning outcomes really clear and concise and actionable and measurable is that good learning outcomes translate into very clear assessment criteria. So, we're not talking, we really don't talk very much about practical assessment on this podcast, with good reason, that we're focusing on simulation as an educational tool, not necessarily as as an assessment strategy, although we know that people do use simulation type assessments and practical assessments. But if you have got your learning objectives really nice and clear for example, skills and drills that you want to do, they translate very, very neatly into assessment criteria for an OSCE.
How many assessment criteria have you stumbled across in your time in education that have put understand in it?
Oh yeah, several. Yeah. I need to be perfectly honest. We're going through a process at the moment of analysing all of the action verbs that are used in the degree program that up until September of this year I course direct, and actually it is interesting to see
because
the range of verbs that are used.
Continuously evolving and process, isn't it?
Yeah.
We're still learning as educators.
Absolutely. I am not Teflon in any of this. You and I are. We're reasonably experienced higher education practitioners, and we've made probably more educational faux pas than most people because of that, because we've had plenty of time to make some mistakes and reflect and get better.
I think it would be really good to have a little bit of homework for our listeners and viewers, wouldn't it? Go and have a look.
I don't know how well this homework strategy is going to go down.
I don't know. But go and have a look at a bit of sim that you currently deliver or are involved in, and go and have a look at those learning outcomes and objectives and poke them with a stick.
Yeah.
See whether they're robust. See if you can apply some better verbs to try and hit the objectives. Because one of the things we also talk about is the learning outcomes and objectives will drive the simulation modality, right? So if all you need to do is demonstrate how to do effective injection technique, and that's your only learning outcome, why are you doing it in this wild, long-winded patient scenario? Mm-hmm. And that actually might mean that your modality of delivery might be completely different from what it was originally intended.
Yeah, absolutely. And equally, if actually a simulation has been proposed to address a knowledge gap, perhaps in relation to an incident of some kind. And if actually it transpires that what learners really need to know is literally just that, to know something, it might be that simulation is an entirely inappropriate methodology at all, and what you need is some good theory.
Yeah.
And so it'll help you to drive that. It will, like you said, getting the verbs right will help you to drive the methodology or the modality.
Okay. Homework has been set. Answers in the comments below.
Who's marking it? If you just, is that like, someone's going to have to mark it.
Oh, no. Yeah. Valid point.
Mark each other's homework.
Yeah.
Peer learning.
Bit of peer learning.
Peer
support.
learning, yes.
And just like every good teaching session, everyone will have probably turned off by now because we've been talking about verbs for over half an hour. So I think we do need to wrap it up.
Yes. The verbal diarrhea has become quite torrential.
Yeah. So what are our key takeaway messages? And dare I say, what are our learning objectives for this? We need to come back to. Do we have any?
I don't think we did. I think
we've just gone on a ramble.
Yeah. No. Yeah. But a ramble with a purpose.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think hopefully out of this episode, what you've got is a useful
I'm gonna put you on
list.
I'm going to put you on the line now.
Oh God.
Let's rift some learning objectives for this. This is completely unprepared, by the way. I am literally throwing Lawrence under the bus right now because it's difficult.
Yeah.
So a learning outcome, I would say
discuss the value of Bloom's taxonomy for simulation-based education.
Okay. Arguably, we have demonstrated that verbs are important when creating learning outcomes.
Mm-hmm. And you can judge whether this has been a useful exercise or not. So yes, thank you, Tony. I shall enjoy getting the bus tyre tracks off of me after today. But no, hopefully you've got something useful out of this, because it is really important. And if you have any observations or reflections and you'd like to get in touch, we would honestly love to hear from you. So thank you very much for listening to this episode of SimCast. We hope you enjoyed it, and we will see you on the next one.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.